As I looked at the case of Christopher Andre Vialva, I couldn't help myself but wonder, how does a person that just turned 40 years old get executed? I mean, people sit on death row for their entire life. But what was it about this man? And what exactly did he do that would get him executed at 40? I looked at a recent photograph of Vialva just to help satisfy my curiosity. Would he look like a cold-blooded killer? Would he look like a gang-affiliated member? What does he look like now? I wonder what he looked like back then. I couldn't help but think, does he have a mental disorder? Was he under the influence of alcohol or drugs when the crime occurred? And one of the first things I thought about was something I recall from medical school. And that is, a child's brain does not get fully developed until the mid-20s. And so I had a very hard time understanding an 18-year-old with a half-developed brain being sentenced to death. And I had to ask myself, were those things, were those questions, were those facts, were they ever even brought up at his appeal? There was one thing about Vialva's appeal I found very troubling. The two state witnesses turned witnesses in exchange for truthful testimony for a lighter punishment and sentence, which is nothing more than a quid pro quo. It made me ask myself, did he really do anything? It made me ask, did the other ones do it? It made me ask, who really pulled the trigger? And it made me ask, does he really deserve to be put to death? We're going to explore the case of Christopher Andre Vialva. This is a true story. Todd Begley and his wife, Stacy Begley, were both youth ministers, serving together from the state of Iowa. Before moving to Iowa from Texas, Todd Begley was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, one of the largest military installations in the United States. And the couple attended their Grace Christian Church, where for many years the Begleys worked with the youth group ministry. Approximately 1 week before their murders, the Begleys returned to Killeen, Texas, to visit some old friends and attend a revival meeting at their beloved church. It was around 2 p.m., Sunday, June 21st, 1999. The Begleys attended church service in the morning and had lunch with some old friends. Afterward, Todd stopped to make a phone call at the Mickey's convenience store and to use the payphone. Stacy waited for him in the car, sitting, while Todd was making the telephone call. Sometime around 2 p.m. on the afternoon of June 21st, defendant Bernard drove Christopher Vialva, Brown, Lewis, and Sparks, all gang members, to a local supermarket to find a victim to rob. Having no luck at the grocery store, the group continued their search, driving around the parking lots in Killeen, looking at other local grocery stores. Their search ended at Mickey's convenience store, where they saw Todd Begley standing there using a payphone and his wife sitting in the car. Lewis and Sparks approached Todd Begley together, and they asked for him for a ride to their uncle's house. Todd agreed. It was a decision that would cost both of them their lives. Christopher Vialva, who was standing nearby, got into the back seat of the Begley's car together with Lewis and Sparks. Todd and Stacy Begley occupied the front seat. Christopher Vialva gave Todd Begley the directions, and he then pulled out a .40 caliber gun and pointed it at Todd Begley and said, "The plans have changed." At the same time, Sparks pointed a .22 caliber handgun at Stacy Begley, and they took control of the two in the process of an armed carjacking and holding both at gunpoint. On Christopher Vialva's orders, Todd Bradley stopped the car, and the Begleys got out. Then the gang stole Todd Begley's wallet, grabbed Stacy Begley's purse and the Begley's jewelry, including Stacy Begley's wedding ring, which was used to pawn for some cash. Christopher Vialva demanded the PIN numbers for the Begley's ATM cards, and then he forced the Begleys into the trunk of their own car. The Begleys had $100 in their bank account. After locking the Begleys into the trunk, Christopher Vialva drove around for several hours. He went from ATM machine to ATM machine to withdraw money from the Begleys' account, but was largely unsuccessful because the Begleys had less than $100. Vialva drove to a Wendy's where Lewis and Sparks used the Begley's money to purchase some food. Vialva then attempted to pawn Stacy Begley's wedding ring, and they stopped at a tobacco store to purchase some cigars and some cigarettes. While they were locked in the trunk, the Begleys spoke with Lewis and Sparks through the rear panel of the car. Lewis testified in court that the Begleys asked them questions about God, and questions about Jesus, and questions about church. The Begleys told Lewis and Sparks that they were not wealthy people, but that they were very blessed by their faith in Jesus. The Begleys informed Lewis and Sparks about the revival meeting at the Christian Grace Church, a church which Lewis said he also attended. Urging them to have some faith, the Begleys advised Lewis and Sparks that God's blessings were available to anyone. After this conversation, Sparks told Vialva he no longer wanted to go through with the crime. However, Vialva insisted on killing the Begleys and burning their car, to eliminate the witnesses and the gang's fingerprints. Vialva drove to his house. While he was inside, the Bagleys had another conversation about God with Lewis and Sparks. By this time, the victims had been locked in the trunk for several hours. The Bagleys pleaded with Lewis and Sparks for their lives. Vialva returned to the car with a ski mask and some additional clothing. Vialva, Lewis, and Sparks then met Bernard and Brown, and Vialva repeated that they had to kill the Bagleys because they had seen his face. Bernard and Brown set off to go and purchase some fuel to burn the Bagleys' car. Vialva, Bernard, Lewis, and Brown then drove to an isolated spot in the Belton Lake Recreation Area located on the Fort Hood Military Reservation, a very large 240,000 acre Vialva parked the Bagleys' car on the top of a hill. Brown and Bernard poured lighter fluid onto the interior of the car while the Bagleys sang and prayed inside the trunk. According to Brown, Stacy's very last words were, "Jesus loves you," and "Jesus, take care of us." Vialva cussed at her. In reply, Vialva put on his mask and told Lewis to open the trunk. Vialva then shot Todd Bagley in the head, killing him instantly. Vialva then shot Stacy in the right side of her face, knocking her unconscious but not killing her. Bernard set the car on fire. An autopsy later revealed that Stacy Bagley died from smoke inhalation. An autopsy revealed soot in Stacy Bagley's larynx, windpipe, trachea, and bronchi, all indications of a very tragic death of smoke inhalation. A toxicology examination of Stacy's blood, according to the medical examiner, revealed an extremely high level of carbon monoxide, the product of breathing smoke carbon monoxide gas from the burning car. Vialva, Bernard, Lewis, and Brown then ran down the hill to the Bernard's getaway car. But their getaway was then foiled when they slid off the road and crashed into a muddy ditch. Local law enforcement officers arrived after being informed of a fire. While the assailants were trying to push their car out of the ditch that they were in, when firefighters discovered the bodies in the trunk of the Bagleys' burning car, the four men were arrested. A grand jury in the United States District Court of Texas indicted Vialva and Bernard for the following crimes: carjacking and abetting, the same violation of count 1, conspiracy to commit murder in violation of count 2, the murder of Todd Bagley with the Maritime Special Territorial Jurisdiction of the United States, and aiding and abetting the violation, count 3, and the murder of Stacy L. Bagley within the Special Maritime and Territorial Jurisdiction of the United States, and aiding and abetting in the same in violation of count 4. The government gave a notice that it would seek the death penalty. On June 1st, 2000, a jury found both Vialva and Bernard guilty on all 4 counts of the indictment. Testimony in the punishment phase of the trial began on June 8, 1999, and lasted 4 days. On June 13, 1999, the jury sentence recommended death against Vialva on counts 1, 3, and 4, and a sentence of death against Bernard on count 4. The district court sentenced Vialva to life imprisonment on count 2 and death on the remaining counts. The court sentenced Bernard to life imprisonment on counts 1, 2, and 3, and death on count 4. There were no mitigating factors found by the jury regarding Bernard. However, 10 of the 12 jurors found Vialva's abused childhood to be a mitigating factor. However, all other mitigating factors submitted regarding Vialva were rejected by the jury. On the special findings form submitted to the jury, stated Part 4 mitigating factors instructions. For each of the following mitigating factors, indicate the numbers of jurors who find the existence of each particular mitigating factor by a preponderance of the evidence. If none of the jurors find a preponderance of the evidence that a particular mitigating factor exists, write the number 0 in the blank provided. Christopher Vialva was 19 at the time of the offense. Number of jurors who so find, if any, 0. Brandon Bernard was 18 at the time of the offense. Number of jurors who find so, if any, 0. In response to both questions regarding mitigating factors, the jurors wrote 0 in both blanks. At trial, a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Mark Cunningham, testified. Doctor, anything that occurred in Chris's life or Mr. Vialva's life was the fact that he, considered himself of mixed race and was confused about that in his childhood. Did you identify that as a risk factor in this case? Yes, I did. That there was a significant amount of confusion. And at different times in his childhood, he identified himself as being white, and then later mixed, and then later black. And the psychological records showed evidence of a lot of turmoil and confusion about that very essential question, who am I? Dr. Cunningham was also asked, how does that affect a person? To which he answered, well, when it was accompanied by some bigotry that he experienced early in that childhood, and by also peer rejection, then that aggravated the effects of it. That there was not a peer group that he easily blended in with, and that's a separate risk factor. In Vialva's case, he experienced some active peer rejection. When he's 6 years old and the other kids are calling him names, throwing rocks at him, then it isn't just that he feels different, although that is a part of it, but that he is actively being discriminated against. End quote. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals noted that, quote, Most of the facts concerning the events that occurred on June 20th through 21st, 1999 were testified as to by Christopher Lewis and Terry Brown, who pled guilty to various offenses in exchange for truthful testimony.